The wind swept across the desert plains, carrying the dry whisper of dust and memory. The sun was sliding low behind the distant mountains, painting the sky with the last burning colors of another hard day. In the heart of that dying light stood a wooden post, weathered by years of wind and judgment. Tied to it was a man, tall, proud, and silent. His skin bore the deep bronze of the desert, his wrists raw from the coarse rope that bound him. His eyes, dark and unbroken, watched the horizon as though waiting for something far greater than mercy. A few yards away, a group of settlers lingered near their wagons, murmuring low among themselves. Their clothes were rough from travel, their faces hollowed by the kind of life that didn't forgive softness. The man they had tied to the post was Apache, one of the last warriors from the SVA, who still refused to bow to the white man's law. He had been caught after a skirmish near the river, accused of raids and bloodshed, though no one seemed to have seen him strike a man that day. In the town beyond the ridge, they called him Savage. Out here, he was just another man waiting for the night to decide his fate. The desert stretched quiet and wide. But in that stillness, another sound began to rise, soft footsteps crunching against the sand. A figure approached, cloaked and careful, the outline of a woman moving through the twilight. Her steps were slow but steady, her hand pressed against the curve of her swollen belly as if to remind herself, or the life within, that she was still strong enough to walk this far. The child inside her stirred as though sensing the danger ahead. She tightened her shawl and glanced toward the guards by the wagon. They were drinking, their laughter rolling thin into the air, careless now that the day's heat had cooled. None of them saw her slipping closer to the prisoner. The woman stopped just beyond the circle of firelight. Her breath came shallow. The Apache's gaze turned toward her, calm and sharp as a knife. For a moment neither spoke. The night wind hissed between them, carrying the dry scent of sage and smoke. She took a step forward, then another, until she was close enough to see the bruises along his arms, the way his chest rose slow and steady, unafraid. Her heart pounded as she whispered, "I'm here to rescue you." He didn't flinch. His eyes searched hers, reading something she wasn't saying. Fear, maybe, or desperation. The woman's voice trembled as she spoke again, quieter now. "I can't stay long. They'll notice if I'm gone too long from the tents." Her hand shook as she reached for the knot on the rope, but he spoke, his voice low and even. "Why would you risk this? You know what they'll do if they catch you?" His words carried no anger, just an old understanding that mercy was a rare thing on this land. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Because you don't belong here. Not like this. And because." She hesitated, glancing toward the wagons. The shadows of men moved against the fire. "Because I owe you." "Ah." The Apache's brow furrowed slightly. "Owe me?" he asked. She nodded. "You don't remember me," she said softly. "But I remember the canyon. The night your people took us, the wagons, the smoke, the screams. You could have let them kill me. But you didn't." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. "You cut me loose, told me to run. I was just a girl then. And now you're the one tied to a post." Her words hung between them, heavy as the fading heat of the desert. He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes shifted, something like recognition. Or maybe sorrow. The wind picked up, rattling the dry weeds. The woman struggled with the knots, her fingers clumsy and weak. Her belly brushed against the post as she leaned forward, breathless. "If I can get you to the horses, you can make for the ridge before sunrise," she whispered. "They'll follow, but the trail will be cold by dawn." A low laugh came from the Apache, quiet and almost bitter. "You think they'll let you live after that?" She didn't answer. She just kept working at the rope, her hands trembling from the strain. Behind them, one of the guards shifted. The sound froze her in place. She looked over her shoulder, heart hammering. The men by the fire were still laughing, passing a bottle around. But one, the tall one with the scar across his cheek, was walking toward the post. The woman dropped her hands, pulling her shawl tighter as she stepped back. "Go," the Apache murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Before they see you?" She shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not leaving you." The guard's shadow stretched long across the sand. The woman turned away just as he came close. "Evening, miss," he slurred, eyes drifting toward her belly. "You shouldn't be out here." "Ain't safe around the prisoner?" She forced a faint smile, her voice calm, despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I just came to pray," she said. "For his soul?" The guard snorted. "He ain't got one of those." He lifted the bottle, taking another swig, and looked toward the bound Apache. "Tomorrow, we'll hang him proper. That'll be the end of it." He turned and staggered back toward the others, the bottle swinging from his hand. The woman exhaled, her knees nearly giving way. The Apache watched her closely. "You shouldn't be doing this," he said quietly. "You have a child." She met his gaze. "That's why I'm doing it. I won't have my child born into a world that kills mercy." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind moved, carrying the sound of far-off coyotes and the distant creak of the wagons. The woman stepped forward again, her hand brushing his arm. "When the moon is high," she whispered, "I'll come back. Be ready." She turned to leave, moving quickly through the shadows toward the line of tents. The Apache watched her go, his heart heavy with something he couldn't name. The night deepened, stars spilling across the desert sky like scattered ash. The fire burned low, and the men fell quiet one by one, until only the crackle of dying embers filled the air. But the Apache didn't sleep. His eyes stayed on the ridge, on the path she would have to take to return. He wondered what kind of woman risked her life for a man the world called enemy. What kind of courage burned behind those dark eyes? Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The desert was vast, indifferent, and yet, for the first time in many moons, he felt something shift inside him. A fragile thread of hope. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher, silver and silent. The guards lay sprawled by the fire, drunk and unaware. And then, from the darkness beyond the wagons, he saw her again, a shadow moving low and quick, a glint of light where the moon touched her hair. She carried something in her hand, a small blade, or maybe a piece of flint. Her steps were careful, but her breathing came fast. The Apache tensed, straining against the rope, every sense alive. She reached the post, her face pale beneath the moonlight. "It's time," she whispered, voice shaking but firm, as she lifted the blade to the rope. The sound of boots struck the ground behind her. A man's voice cut through the night. "What the hell are you doing?" The woman froze. The Apache's muscles tightened. The shadow of the scarred guard loomed over them, a pistol gleaming in his hand. The fire behind him flared as the wind shifted, lighting the fear in the woman's eyes. She dropped the knife, her hand going instinctively to her belly. The Apache drew in a slow breath, his gaze locked on the man's weapon. The desert air went still, heavy with the weight of what came next. And in that breathless moment, between moonlight and death, everything hung in silence, a woman's courage, a warrior's fate, and a promise whispered in the dark that neither time nor fear could unmake. The guard's voice sliced through the stillness like a blade, rough and angry from the whiskey. The woman froze, her fingers tightening around the folds of her shawl as the moonlight caught the silver buckle on his belt. Behind her, the Apache stood motionless, eyes locked on the man approaching. The guard's boots sank into the sand with each step, his shadow stretching longer across the fire's glow. "You think I can't see what you're doing out here?" he growled, his voice low, but sharp enough to cut the quiet. "You think I don't know you're kind, soft-hearted, trying to save something that can't be saved?" The woman's voice came out calm but trembling. "Please," she said, turning slowly to face him. "You're drunk. Go back to your fire." He stopped a few feet away, the gun hanging loose in his hand. "Drunk or not, I know a liar when I see one." His eyes drifted toward her belly, then back to the Apache. "You trying to save a murderer? He and his kind killed settlers, women, children. You know what that means for you, if the captain finds out?" She swallowed hard, holding her ground. "He didn't kill anyone that day," she said softly. "You don't know what really happened." The guard laughed, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Doesn't matter. Out here, truth don't mean much. Only the side you're standing on." He lifted the gun slightly, and the woman instinctively stepped back, shielding her stomach. The Apache's voice cut through the air, deep and steady. "You'll regret that," he said in his broken English. The guard sneered, turning the gun toward him. "You shut your mouth, Redskin. You'll get your say when the rope's around your neck." The woman took a sudden step forward. "Stop it," she snapped, her fear giving way to something fierce. "You talk about justice, but you're no better than the men you hate." Her voice quivered, but her eyes didn't move from his. For a moment, the guard hesitated. Something in her tone made him falter. Then his jaw tightened, and he lowered the gun slightly. "Go back to your tent," he muttered. "You got no business here." She held her breath, then turned slowly, pretending to retreat. The guard watched her until she vanished into the darkness. When he finally turned back toward the fire, the Apache's eyes followed him, cold and unyielding. When she reached the tents, her hands were shaking. She sank down behind one of the wagon wheels, pressing a hand to her belly as the baby moved restlessly. The night air bit at her face, but her mind burned with fear and anger. Every step of her plan now felt heavier. If the guard had seen the knife, if he had told the others, there would be no second chance. Yet as she looked out at the bound figure under the moonlight, she knew she couldn't stop. Not now. Not after all that had already been lost. Her thoughts drifted back to the canyon years ago, the one she had spoken of to him. The memory came clear and painful. The flames rising from the wagons, the sound of gunfire echoing off the rocks, and the cries of the dying. She had been no more than 17, hiding behind a boulder, with her hands over her ears, praying it would end. When the shooting stopped, the Apaches moved through the smoke like shadows. One of them had found her, trembling and half-blind with fear. He could have ended her life right there. Instead, he had cut the rope from her wrists and pointed toward the mountains, telling her to run. She never forgot his eyes dark, calm and full of something she didn't understand then. She knew now it was mercy. That same mercy had followed her all these years, through hunger, loss, the slow ache of survival. The baby inside her kicked again, and she smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed wet. She had lost her husband the year before, killed on a cattle drive gone wrong. The settlement had taken her in out of pity, but pity only went so far. The men talked about her behind her back, saying the child would be a burden, that she'd never make it alone. But she had learned to endure, just as the desert endured everything that tried to break it. And now, somehow, her fate was tied to that Apache's. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was the only good thing left she could still do. The night dragged on, slow and heavy. The guard who had caught her finally stumbled back to the fire, muttering curses before collapsing in the sand. One by one, the others followed, until silence once again ruled the camp. The only sound was the soft crackle of dying wood and the endless sigh of the desert wind. She waited until the stars were fading pale and the first line of dawn touched the hills. Her body was tired, but her will had hardened. She stood, pulling the knife from her boot once more, and made her way back to the post. The Apache had not moved. His head was bowed, but his eyes opened as she approached. "You came back," he said quietly. She nodded. "We don't have much time." Her fingers worked quickly at the rope, the knife sliding through the fibers. "Once I cut you free, head north. There's a creek behind the ridge that runs into the mountains. They won't track you past the rocks." His voice stayed low. "And you, what will you tell them?" She hesitated, her hands stilling for a moment. "I'll think of something," she said. "Maybe I'll say I was praying again. They think I'm harmless." He studied her face, the lines of exhaustion and determination. "You risk too much," he murmured. "Why?" She paused, looking at him. "Because someone once showed me kindness when I had nothing left. And because this land's taken enough life already." The last strand of rope gave way, falling into the sand. The Apache flexed his wrists, the marks red and raw. He didn't move right away. Instead, he looked at her one last time. "You have a brave heart," he said. "The desert remembers people like you." She almost smiled, but the sound of movement behind them froze her in place. The scarred guard was awake. He rose unsteadily, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene, the freed prisoner, the woman with a knife, the loose ropes at the post. His shout ripped through the dawn. "She's helping him! Stop them!" The camp exploded into chaos. Men stumbled from their tents, grabbing rifles and shouting orders. The Apache seized her arm. Run, he hissed. She shook her head. You go. But he didn't wait for her protest. With one swift motion, he pulled her behind him as bullets cracked through the air, sending dust and splinters flying. They darted between the wagons, the woman clutching her belly as she struggled to keep up. The Apache caught the reins of a nearby horse, cutting it loose from its post. He hoisted her up, ignoring her protests, then swung onto the saddle behind her. The gunfire grew louder, echoing through the desert. Hold on, he said, and drove his heels into the horse's flank. The animal bolted, kicking up sand as it raced toward the ridge. Behind them, shouts filled the morning air, and the captain's voice barked orders to fire. The horse thundered across the open plain, the cold wind burning their faces. The woman clung to the Apache's arm, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The baby moved inside her again, restless from the motion. She could feel the heat of his body against her back, the steady strength of a man who had known pain and still refused to break. Ahead, the hills rose higher, sharp against the brightening sky. She didn't dare look back, but she could hear the gunfire fading behind them. The Apache didn't speak, his focus locked on the ridge. When they finally reached the rocky path, he pulled the horse to a stop and turned it toward the shadowed canyon beyond. She looked over her shoulder. Far behind, tiny figures moved across the plain, their rifles glinting in the sun. They won't stop, she said breathlessly. They'll keep coming. He nodded. Then we keep moving. She wanted to believe him. But her body ached, her breath coming in sharp gasps. I can't go much farther, she whispered. He looked down at her, his expression softening. Then we rest in the canyon, he said. The land will hide us. The horse trotted into the narrow passage where the rocks rose high and red around them. Shadows cooled the air. The woman's trembling eased, but her thoughts spun with everything she had just done. She had betrayed the only people who had given her shelter, broken the law, and thrown herself into a life she didn't understand. Yet as she looked at the Apache beside her, there was no regret, only the heavy weight of what might come next. He dismounted and helped her down carefully. You'll be safe here, he said, scanning the cliffs above. No one follows us into these rocks. She caught her breath and looked around at the stillness. What will you do now? She asked. He met her eyes. Find my people, he said. If they still live. The sadness in his voice was deep, older than the hills themselves. She wanted to say something that would ease the pain that lingered behind his calm. But the words wouldn't come. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls gold. The Apache knelt by the creek, cupping water into his hands. She watched him, realizing that their fates were now tangled in ways she couldn't yet see. Far beyond the ridge, the echoes of the chase still carried on the wind. But for the moment, the desert was quiet again. And between them hung an unspoken truth. Their journey had only just begun. The canyon lay still under the morning sun, the air dry and quiet except for the soft rush of the creek winding through the rocks. The Apache knelt by the water's edge, washing the blood and dirt from his wrists where the ropes had torn the skin. His reflection shimmered in the rippling surface, a face hardened by years of war and loss. Behind him, the woman sat beneath a small patch of shade, breathing slow and shallow, one hand resting over her belly. She had been silent since they stopped, her eyes following the shifting light on the canyon walls. The events of the night still clung to her like dust she couldn't shake off. He turned to look at her. You should drink, he said. His voice was low, but steady. She hesitated, then nodded. He filled a small canteen and brought it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and for a fleeting moment, the silence between them felt heavier than the danger outside the canyon. Thank you, she murmured, her voice rough from exhaustion. He nodded once and looked toward the ridge. They will come, he said. The soldiers will not stop. She lowered the canteen, meeting his gaze. How long before they find us? He shook his head. Maybe a day, maybe less. The desert tells them nothing, but men like that, they follow hate better than tracks. The words settled between them, grim and certain. She looked down at her hands, still shaking slightly. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said. I only wanted to help you escape. I didn't think they'd chase this far. Studied her face. You knew they would. You just hoped the land would protect us. Her eyes filled with something like guilt. Does it ever? She asked quietly. He didn't answer. The canyon stretched wide and silent, holding its secrets in the stone. A hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding across the ground. The Apache watched it for a while, his thoughts drifting. He had lived through too many hunts like this, men chasing men, both thinking they were right. But this time was different. A woman had risked her life for him, and for reasons he couldn't yet understand. That fact troubled him more than the danger itself. Her courage reminded him of someone long gone, a face buried deep in memory. Years ago, before the wars, before the camps, he had a sister who once walked into a settler's town to beg for medicine for their mother. She never came back. The soldiers said she was lost to the desert, but he always knew better. That memory never left him, and now this woman's face kept stirring it up again. By noon, the heat had begun to press down on the canyon, turning every rock into a mirror of fire. The woman wiped sweat from her brow and tried to rest, but her body wouldn't calm. Every rustle of wind or scrape of stone made her flinch. You should go, she said suddenly. Leave me here and run while you can. The Apache shook his head. You would not last an hour alone. Then we'll both be caught, she said. He stood, glancing toward the canyon's mouth. If they come, I will draw them away. She frowned. And what then? They'll kill you. His eyes met hers. They've been trying for years. She didn't know what to say to that. The weight of his words sank into her chest. I don't want anyone else to die, she said softly. Not for me. He looked away, toward the distant line of sunlight cutting through the rocks. Out here, life and death are the same thing. One belongs to the other. A few hours later, the sound of horses reached them faintly through the wind. The woman stiffened, clutching her belly. They've found us. The Apache raised his hand for silence. He crouched, pressing his ear to the ground. The rumble grew clearer. Several riders, maybe 6 or 7, coming fast. He stood and turned to her. You'll stay here, he said. No, she whispered, but he had already moved toward the rocks, scanning the cliffs for a place to climb. She watched him vanish into the upper ledge, his body blending into the shadows. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing through the canyon like a drumbeat of fate. The first rider appeared at the canyon's edge, rifle across his lap. He was the scarred guard, the one who had caught her the night before. Behind him came others, their faces grim with anger and heat. They dismounted and spread out, rifles ready. Fan out, the guard shouted. He couldn't have gone far. Check the creek. 2 of the men waded through the water, scanning the banks. The woman crouched behind a boulder, holding her breath, praying they wouldn't see her. Her heart thudded against her ribs, the baby shifting uncomfortably inside her. She pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting the urge to cry out. From above, the Apache watched them silently. His hand tightened around the handle of the knife he had taken from her. He counted their movements, every step, every shadow. There were too many of them to fight head-on, and with her below, he couldn't risk it. The scarred guard knelt near the creek, touching the sand. They stopped here, he muttered. Fresh prints. 2 sets. He stood, glancing around. She's with him. I knew it. His men exchanged looks. One of them spoke hesitantly. Sir, the captain said we should bring them back alive. The guard's expression hardened. The captain ain't here now. We end this before sundown. The Apache's eyes narrowed. He could see the rage in that man's posture, the kind that didn't listen to reason. He looked down toward the woman, her figure small and frightened beneath the rock. If he moved now, they'd see him. If he waited too long, they'd find her. His mind raced through the terrain. There was a narrow passage higher up that led to another exit from the canyon. If he could draw them that way, she might have a chance. The guard gave a sharp whistle, signaling the others to spread wider. The moment they turned, the Apache shifted along the rocks, kicking a loose stone that clattered down the slope. The guard's head snapped up. Up there, he shouted. Bullets cracked through the air, shattering stone and sending dust flying. The woman ducked lower, pressing her face into her knees as the echoes of gunfire filled the canyon. The Apache moved swiftly along the ledge, keeping low, his footsteps silent as wind. He reached a narrow rise, took aim with a thrown rock, and struck a rifle from one man's hands below. The man cursed, stumbling backward into the creek. The others fired again, but their shots went wild. The woman seized the chance to move. Crawling through the shadows, she made her way toward the horses tied near the mouth of the canyon. Every step burned, but she didn't stop. She reached the nearest horse and untied its reins, whispering to calm it. The animal snorted softly, but didn't bolt. She climbed onto the saddle, glancing toward the ridge where the Apache fought unseen. Her throat tightened with fear. She couldn't leave him, not after everything. But before she could decide, a gunshot split the air and echoed off the stone. The horse reared, and she barely held on. From above, a figure tumbled down the slope, one of the soldiers, hit by his own ricochet. The guard cursed loudly. "Spread out. Don't let him get away." Dust filled the air, choking and hot. The Apache appeared suddenly from the rocks, landing hard near the creek. His arm was bleeding, but he didn't slow. He grabbed the horse's bridle and looked up at her. "Ride," he ordered. She shook her head. "Not without you." His tone turned sharp. "They will kill you if you stay, and what about you?" She cried. He didn't answer. He just looked at her with the same quiet resolve he had shown since the beginning. "If I fall," he said, "then you keep going. Find the old mission west of here. Tell them the desert sent you. They'll understand." She wanted to protest, but the sound of charging men cut her off. He slapped the horse's flank, sending it bolting forward. The world blurred around her as wind and fear took hold. She looked back once, just in time to see him turn toward the oncoming soldiers, his knife glinting in the sun. Her heart twisted painfully. The canyon echoed with shouts and the ring of steel. She didn't know how long she rode, only that the sound of gunfire faded behind her until there was nothing left but wind and the steady rhythm of hooves against the dry earth. When the sun dipped low again, she stopped at the edge of a wide plain, trembling and covered in dust. The horse's sides heaved, its coat streaked with sweat. She slid from the saddle and fell to her knees, staring back toward the horizon where the canyon disappeared into haze. Her body ached, her breath shallow. "Please," she whispered, though she didn't know to whom. "Let him live." In the distance, vultures circled above the cliffs. The sight made her stomach twist, but she forced herself to look away. The land stretched endless and cruel around her, but somewhere ahead, beyond the flat horizon, lay the promise of the mission, the only place she might still find hope. Behind her, in the shadows of the canyon, the dust of battle still lingered, and the fate of the man she had tried to save remained locked in the silence of the desert. Waiting for night to fall again, the desert stretched wide and empty, a burning ocean of sand and silence. The woman rode hard through the fading light, her face streaked with sweat and dust, her mind heavy with fear. Behind her, the sun was sinking into a deep red haze, painting the sky with the color of blood. Every time the horse stumbled, her heart leapt in her chest. She didn't know if the Apache had survived the fight in the canyon, or if the soldiers still followed her trail. All she knew was that she had to keep going west, toward the old mission he had spoken of. It was her only hope now. The wind picked up, carrying the dry sting of grit against her skin. She pulled her shawl tighter, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The child inside moved again, restless, as if sensing her fear. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice cracking in the wind. "We'll be safe soon." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if she believed it. The land around her felt endless and cruel, a place where mercy rarely took root. Still, she rode on, driven by something stronger than recent a promise she had made in the dark and the faint. Stubborn hope that the man she had risked everything for might still be alive by the time the first stars appeared. The horse's pace had slowed. Its breath came harsh and ragged, foam streaking its neck. She finally pulled the reins and let it stop beside a cluster of dry rocks. The night had grown cold, and the vast silence pressed down like a weight. She slid from the saddle, her legs trembling, and sank to the ground. Every muscle ached. She tried to rest, but her thoughts refused to quiet. The image of the Apache standing against the soldiers kept flashing in her mind, the flash of gunfire. The sound of his voice telling her to ride. The look in his eyes when he said, "If I fall, keep going." She closed her eyes, but the memory burned too sharp to fade. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills, he could still be fighting, or wounded, or worse. The guilt tore at her. She had left him behind, even though every part of her had wanted to stay. But what choice did she have? She thought of the baby again, small and fragile beneath her ribs. "You'll live," she whispered, "even if I don't." The words felt heavy, final, but they gave her strength to move. She gathered what little food she had left and built a small fire, shielding it from the wind with her shawl. The flames flickered low, throwing long shadows over the rocks. Far off in the distance, a sound broke through the stillness, the faint echo of hooves. She froze, her body tightening. It could have been her imagination, or the creak of the desert itself. But then it came again, clearer this time. She rose slowly, heart pounding. Her first thought was the soldiers. Maybe they had tracked her. Maybe the scarred guard had survived and was coming to finish what he started. She reached for the knife she had carried since the canyon, gripping it tightly though her hands trembled. The firelight danced across the blade. The sound grew louder, closer, then faded again, swallowed by the wind. She waited, holding her breath. Minutes passed, long and heavy. Nothing. Only the whisper of the desert. Finally, she let out a shaky sigh and lowered the knife though her heart still raced. She sat back beside the fire, but her body stayed tense, ready for whatever might emerge from the darkness. When sleep finally took her, it came in short bursts, broken dreams filled with gunfire, smoke, and the echo of the Apache's voice. By dawn, the fire had died to ash. The air was cool again, the kind of quiet morning that made the desert look almost gentle. She stirred and pushed herself up, rubbing her eyes. Then she saw them. Hoofprints, fresh ones. Her pulse quickened as she knelt beside them. The tracks were deep, made by a single horse moving fast from the east. Someone was following her. She didn't know if it was friend or foe, but she couldn't stay to find out. She kicked sand over the fire, gathered her things, and mounted up again. The horse was tired, but it obeyed. She turned west, toward the low hills that marked the edge of the desert. Somewhere beyond them was the old mission, a place once built by men of faith, now rumored to be half-ruined and deserted. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and maybe help. She urged the horse forward, glancing back every few minutes. The tracks behind her seemed to stretch forever. She imagined the soldiers riding hard, their rifles ready, their anger burning hotter than the sun. Her mind replayed the guard's cruel smile and the words he'd spat at her. "He ain't got a soul." She gritted her teeth. Maybe not in their eyes. But she had seen something human in the Apache that none of them ever could. As the day wore on, the hills grew closer. The land began to rise, dotted with the brittle remains of old mesquite and thorn brush. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked. She took a small sip from her canteen, but the water was nearly gone. Just when she thought she might not make it, she spotted something ahead, a crumbling bell tower rising above the rocks. Relief flooded her. The mission. It stood like a ghost of another world, its walls broken but still holding against time. She urged the horse forward, tears stinging her eyes. When she reached the gate, she slid down and looked around. The courtyard was silent, the wooden doors hanging crooked from their hinges. Faded crosses marked the walls, half covered in sand. She stepped inside, calling softly, "Hello." Her voice echoed back at her, thin and lonely. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Only the flutter of birds from the rafters. She moved deeper inside, her boots crunching on the dusty floor. There were old pews, broken icons, and the faint smell of sage. It looked abandoned, but not completely forgotten. Someone had been here not long ago. She found a small pile of ashes near the altar, cold, but fresh. Before she could look closer, a voice came from behind her. "You shouldn't have come." She spun around, the knife flashing in her hand. A tall figure stood in the doorway, half hidden by the light. For a moment, her heart stopped. Then she saw his face, the Apache. He was alive, though pale and worn. a bandage around his arm. "You're hurt," she breathed, stepping toward him. He didn't move. His eyes held both relief and anger. "I told you to keep going," he said. "I did," she whispered. "And I found this place. I thought you were dead." He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "I almost was. They followed you. I led them the wrong way, through the ravine. Some fell. The rest will come soon." The words struck her like a stone. "They're still coming?" He nodded. "They won't stop until we're both gone." She sank onto a bench, clutching her stomach. "Then what do we do?" He turned, scanning the hills through a cracked window. "We fight if we must, or we run again." His tone was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the weariness in his stance. He crossed the room and crouched beside her. "You're tired," he said quietly. "Rest for now. I'll watch the road." She shook her head. "No, I can help." "You've done enough," he replied. "You saved me. That debt is already too heavy." She reached out and touched his hand. "I didn't save you for a debt. I did it because it was right." For the first time, his face softened. He looked away, as if unsure how to meet her gaze. Outside, the wind howled through the broken arches. Carrying with it the distant rhythm of hooves, he rose suddenly and went to the doorway. "They're near," he said. "Less than an hour." Fear tightened her chest. "Then we can't stay here. There's no time to flee," he replied. "The horse won't make another mile." He began gathering whatever he could find, old wood, broken beams, to barricade the entrance. She watched him work, his movements quick and deliberate. The air inside the mission grew tense, charged with the weight of what was coming. The woman stood slowly, her hand on her belly. "If they come, they'll kill us both," she said softly. "Then let them try," he answered, without turning. The first shot came before sunset. The bullet struck the door, sending splinters flying. The woman screamed, dropping behind a pew. The Apache pulled her to cover, his eyes hard and focused. "Stay down," he ordered. Another shot rang out, echoing through the stone walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. Shadows moved outside, circling the courtyard. Voices shouted commands, muffled but clear. The guard was among them. She could recognize his rough tone anywhere. "Surround the place. Don't let them slip away." The Apache loaded his rifle, the same one he must have taken from one of the fallen soldiers. He aimed toward the doorway, breathing slow. The woman crouched beside him, her heart pounding. The light from the dying sun cut through the cracks in the wall, turning the room into a battlefield of gold and shadow. "They'll burn it down," she whispered. He nodded grimly. "Then we fight before the fire reaches us." The sound of boots drew closer, crunching against the dirt outside. She could hear the guard's laughter, cruel, certain. The Apache tightened his grip on the rifle. "Stay behind me," he said. "Whatever happens, don't move." She wanted to speak, to tell him something, anything, but the words stuck in her throat. The air felt thick, charged with fear and fate. Then the door burst open, light flooding in, as the soldiers stepped through the smoke. The Apache fired, and the old mission shook under the storm that followed. The gunfire tore through the air, echoing inside the old mission like thunder trapped between stone walls. The Apache's rifle cracked again and again, each shot answering the soldiers who pushed through the doorway. The woman stayed low behind the fallen pews, covering her ears as splinters and dust rained from the ceiling. The sound of men shouting mixed with the cries of horses outside, and for a moment the world became a blur of noise and fear. She could feel her heart beating fast, the child inside her turning restlessly as if reacting to the storm of violence around them. The Apache moved like a shadow, calm even as the chaos raged. He fired through the doorway, then ducked to reload, sweat glistening on his skin. The woman crawled toward him, her hand trembling as she touched his arm. "They're too many," she whispered. "You have to stop." He looked at her briefly, his dark eyes steady and fierce. "If I stop, you die," he said simply, then turned back toward the entrance. His rifle barked once more, and one of the attackers fell. The rest hesitated, using the courtyard walls for cover. The scarred guard shouted from outside, his voice full of hatred. "You think you can hide behind those walls forever? We'll burn it down with you inside." The Apache's jaw tightened. He knew the man would do it. Men like him didn't leave anything behind, not even ashes. He scanned the room quickly, then motioned for her to follow him toward the back. They slipped through a narrow passage behind the altar. It's an old service corridor that led to a crumbling door half covered by fallen beams. "This way," he said. "It opens to the western ridge." She moved as fast as she could, clutching her stomach, every step sending sharp pain through her back. Behind them, flames began to lick through the front of the mission. The dry wood caught quickly, feeding on the years of dust and decay. Smoke curled through the cracks, thick and black. "They've set it on fire," she cried. "We'll be trapped." He grabbed a fallen beam and forced it aside, coughing from the smoke. "Not yet," he said. The door gave way with a crack of old hinges, and sunlight poured in. He pulled her through, helping her down the rocky slope outside. From the ridge, they could see the mission burning, flames curling high into the twilight sky. The soldiers stood in the courtyard below, their faces lit by the orange glow. The scarred guard barked orders, sending 2 men around the back to search. "Go," the Apache whispered, guiding her down the path toward the dry creek bed. "Stay low." She nodded, though her breath came in ragged gasps. The heat from the fire chased them down the slope, and the smell of smoke clung to her hair and clothes. They reached the bottom, where the canyon opened into a narrow trail between boulders. The Apache stopped, listening. The shouts behind them grew louder, closer. He looked at her, then at the darkening horizon. "You have to keep moving," he said. "The mission's gone. They'll follow us here." "I can't," she gasped, holding her belly. "It's time." The words froze him. He looked at her face, pale and strained, and understood.
"Now?"
he asked. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Now, the pain had begun, sharp, relentless, unstoppable. He looked around, scanning for shelter, and spotted a small hollow beneath the rocks near the creek. "Come," he said, lifting her gently and carrying her toward. He laid her down carefully, his hands shaking for the first time since the battle began. "Breathe," he told her softly. "I will keep them away," where she grabbed his arm. "Don't go," she pleaded. "You can't fight them alone." He looked at her, his face caught between duty and fear. "If I don't, they'll find you and the child. You have to trust me." She clung to his wrist, her eyes pleading. "If I don't see you again, promise me you'll remember this child." His voice broke for the first time. "I will." He took her knife and disappeared toward the trail. The sound of hooves and voices drew closer. The woman lay there in the hollow, every breath coming hard. Pain rolled through her body in waves, but she bit her lip to keep quiet. The baby was coming fast, and she was alone. She remembered the night in the camp when she whispered, "I'm here to rescue you," and how his eyes had met hers in the darkness. She had never thought it would come to this. Gunfire cracked in the distance again. The sound echoed through the canyon, each shot tearing through the silence like thunder. She cried out as another contraction hit, gripping the edge of a rock until her knuckles turned white. She prayed under her breath, words lost in the wind. Above her, the last light of day faded, and the first stars appeared. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time blurred in pain and fear. Then finally, the cries of a newborn filled the hollow. The woman wept, holding the tiny child against her chest. Tears and sweat mingled on her face, but her heart swelled with relief. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're safe now." But even as she said it, gunfire rang out again, closer this time. A shadow appeared on the ridge. The Apache stumbled into view, his steps unsteady. He was bleeding from the shoulder, his shirt torn, but his eyes were still fierce. When he saw her cradling the child, something in his face softened completely. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he touched the baby's small hand. "You did it," he said quietly. "He's alive." She smiled weakly. "We both are." He looked back toward the ridge, where the glow of torches flickered. "They're still coming," he said. "We can't stay," she nodded, her voice faint. "Take him." "No," he said firmly. "You both come." But she could barely move. "You'll have to carry him," she whispered. "You know the way better than I do." Her voice faltered, her strength fading. "Go west until you reach the river. There'll be a crossing. You'll find people there who will help." He hesitated, torn between his promise and the sight of her weakening before him. "You have to come," he said again, desperate now. "I can't leave you here." She looked at him, her eyes soft but full of resolve. "You already saved me," she said. "Now save him." Shouts grew louder. He could see the torches moving down the slope, closer every second. He knew there was no more time. With one last look, he reached down and lifted the child from her arms. The baby stirred, crying softly. "I'll come back," he said. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Go," she whispered. He turned and ran through the shadows, the baby held close against his chest. The canyon echoed with the sound of boots and shouting. The woman watched him vanish into the darkness, her heart torn between pain and peace. The flames from the burning mission glowed faintly against the night sky, and she closed her eyes, whispering a prayer for the man and the child, now bound by the same fate. Hours later, the soldiers reached the hollow. They found only her, pale and still, with the firelight flickering on her face. The captain dismounted beside her and knelt. "She's gone," he said quietly. The scarred guard spat into the dirt. "And the savage?" The captain looked toward the river. "Gone too." The guard cursed, but the captain said nothing. He stood, his gaze lingering on the woman's peaceful face. "Leave her," he said finally. "The desert will take care of her." By morning, the wind had covered the tracks leading west. The Apache followed the trail until dawn, carrying the baby through the shifting dunes. The sky turned gold, and the cries of coyotes faded into the distance. When he reached the river, he stopped and knelt beside the water. The child was quiet now, sleeping soundly in his arms. He looked out across the wide land, the land that had taken everything from him and yet somehow given something back. He remembered the woman's words, her courage, her eyes in the firelight. He whispered something in his own language, a promise only the desert could hear. Then he rose, wading into the shallow water, the child's small hand clutching his shirt. The river flowed slow and steady, carrying them toward the far horizon where the mountains met the morning sun. Behind them, the smoke from the mission drifted away into the sky, leaving only silence and the soft echo of a woman's voice carried on the wind. The desert, vast and endless, swallowed it all: pain, love, the memory of a night when mercy lived, if only for a moment. And somewhere beyond that horizon, the story of a pregnant woman who rescued an imprisoned Apache became part of the land itself, whispered again and again by the wind that never forgot.